Welcome to PseudoPod Towers. Get comfy. Find a cushion to hide behind. You're going to need it. PseudoPod, episode 598, June 8th. Let's say 8th. This week's story, Walk in Beauty by Jim Bihyeh.
Lead me to a lonely place, dressed for opening time. Show me bleeding where my love burns you breathing fire.
Hey everyone, welcome to PseudoPod, the weekly horror podcast. I'm Alistair, your host, and this week's story comes to us from Jim Bihyeh, an old friend of the show and one of my all-time favourite authors. In fact, this story was first published in the PseudoPod 10th Anniversary Anthology for Mortal Things Unsung, and follows immediately after the end of Jim's anthology Coyote Tales, available now from your favourite purveyors of audiobooks, one of which will be linked in the show notes. This is Jim's 5th appearance on PseudoPod. 3 of those are Coyote Tales, 1 is under a different name, a 4th was released as bonus content and is on the convention table. Don't know what the convention table is? Well, we also call it the premium content table, or the premium content bucket. I'll go into more detail about this at the other end of the show, but it's really very simple. If you donate $5 a month either through PayPal or Patreon, you get access to the table, and there is all kinds of great stuff on there, and no flyers, and no weird ribbons whose central punchline and joke you forget inside 15 seconds. Win! Anywho, your reader for this week is Jim's frequent partner in awesome, Cayenne Chris Conroy. So, they and we have a story for you, and we promise you, it's true.
Walk in Beauty by Jim Bihyeh. Tomacita Jones walked over the yellowing grass of the Carl Shepard Memorial Football Stadium next to Wide Reeds Elementary School, listening to the autumn wind shake the elm trees at the edge of the gravel track circling the field. The winds were getting stronger now, the nights longer. The cold was becoming more real and the trees knew it, so they were letting their leaves die. She didn't like that thought as she bent over her knees and stretched her all-too-chubby legs under her all-too-puffy sweatpants. She double-knotted the laces on her scuffed running shoes. She hadn't worn them in years, not since Rosa, her granddaughter, had been born. She felt snot about to drip from the tip of her nose, and she brushed it away with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. But she was wearing the damn shoes today, and they were helping her forget about those trees, hissing and letting their leaves drop away. Maybe that's what life led you toward. You let go of the things that were supposed to die, and they dropped to the earth so that the rest of you, what really existed down in the roots, could survive the winter. It sounded like something her own grandfather might have said, only he would have spoken in Navajo. The earth teaches us, the plants teach us, and the old man had gone running in the morning nearly every day, until the stroke had dropped him 9 years ago. He'd always told his grandkids to run, and Tomacita had done it, along with her 4 older sisters. Some days grandfather made them put water in their mouths and run up hills so they could only breathe through their noses. "It's so you know how to find your breath, even when you're hurt or distracted," he said. "That way, when you face danger, you'll make a good showing of yourself. That way you won't be a coward." For Tomacita and her sisters, it was torture, until grandfather patted them on the back or touched their heads or gave them candy, his silent way of saying he was proud of them. When her father made them start going to the Christian church services, grandfather stopped coming around. Grandfather and her dad had yelled at each other when her dad wouldn't allow grandfather to plan Tomacita's kinalda, her womanhood ceremony, when following a volleyball game in middle school she'd bled from her privates for the first time. Years later, after she'd won Miss Indian Princess for the Eastern Reservation, Grandfather hadn't come to any parts of the competition. Not the song and dance, not the fire building, not the fry bread making, not even the butchering when Tomacita had slit her sheep's throat, skinned its body, hung the carcass, and started moving the organs into the metal salad bowl long before most of the other girls had even broken the back legs. Grandfather and Grandmother had taught her to butcher, and they hadn't even seen her win. Tomacita readjusted her ponytail and brushed away the memory of the Miss Eastern Navajo crown and the sash and the college money. Yes, it was a good memory, but it was tied to so many other bad ones. And pulling it up made as much sense as hitching up a strong horse just so it could pull the body of a dead one. It didn't come to anything. Never had. She started walking, feeling the foamy pocket of fat bunching and pinching behind her knees and armpits and neck and other places where it hadn't been on the day of the sheep butchering. She'd had 3 children since then, and she dealt with 2 husbands to get them. All that time, she'd kept her weight under control, but no more. She didn't bother going to see Alta, one of her sisters who worked as a nurse at Red House Hospital down in the valley, to find out why. She knew why. She was getting older. She was getting slower. And she was eating more, especially since she'd almost lost her job as a math teacher at Wide Reeds Middle School last year. The principal had said they were facing budget cuts, and they were now teaching fewer students. They'd already cut 2 of the math teachers. Tomacita was the most senior teacher in that department, though, so her job had been saved. And people in the building really liked her. She was the first to volunteer for charity events, the first to hang flyers for the Navajo taco sales for the volleyball team, and she always stayed after school to help the students who struggled to find X or to graph Y with the correct slope. As she walked the corner of the track, she noticed a small pale ring at her feet. She stopped and bent to pick it up. It was a bracelet. White shell beads circled on a piece of tough brown string. It looked like something out of a museum, but it was beautiful. Ayo nijon. And it would definitely sit beautiful on Rosa's wrist. Her granddaughter was already nearly a year old, and her mother hadn't even bought her a bracelet yet. She said she didn't have the money. Well, this bracelet on the track would do just fine, and for free. As she tucked the bracelet into the small pocket of her sweatpants, she already imagined how good it would feel to say, "Grandma found this bracelet for you when she was out running this morning." The white bead shimmered in the gray light of the dawn. Just perfect. A dart of movement from the edge of the track caught her eye. She could already tell what it was by the long gray body, the loping red-brown legs, the pointy ears. The coyote darted in behind a tall salt brush and then ran up the hill toward the highway. It seemed like there were more of them in Wide Reeds now than when she was a girl. Tomacita picked up her pace as she rounded the first lap. She hadn't wanted to talk to her sister Alta about the weight gain, but Alta, who could never keep her mouth closed for more than a day about anything, had said Tomacita should build up her speed until she was finally jogging her final lap. She said it all needed to be gradual. Alta had given her some pamphlets, and Tomacita had learned that fat was actually made of little yellow cells in your body, and you couldn't just shed them like they were leaves. They had to slowly shrink down until you could feel good muscle and bone beneath. She promised herself it would all be worth the huff and puff. She thought she could make it. When she walked into the front door of her trailer, it felt like someone had sewn softballs under her kneecaps. She hadn't jogged a step. She hadn't even finished the 3rd lap. Sweat coated the underside of her puffy chin like grease. When she walked in, her daughter-in-law, Lorna, was cooking breakfast. The smell of the bacon, potatoes, and tortillas hit her in a steamy cloud. She felt sick and stepped back outside into the cold to catch her breath. After she walked in, and Lorna, spatula in one hand, little baby Rosa in the other, asked her if she felt all right, Tomacita just shook her head and told her she was fine. She took Rosa off Lorna's hip and bounced the smiling baby that all her brothers called Shanali Yaj Biwos Adini, little toothless grandma. She smoothed the baby's black downy hair onto her soft scalp and dipped her back and forth while checking the diaper. "She needs changing," Tomacita said. "I know," Lorna said, scooping the potatoes out onto the paper plates on the table for the 3 boys. The paper plates kept the family from washing dishes and killing each other. Thank God for the dollar store in Gallup. "I can do it," Tomacita said, taking Rosa into the bedroom. After, she slipped the white bead bracelet onto the baby's chubby wrist and kissed one of those huffy-puffy cheeks. When she carried Rosa back into the kitchen, the boys had already started eating. "I'll feed her," Tomacita said, getting a bit of potato and mashing it on a paper plate. "Oh, hey," said Lorna, shaking Rosa's teeny hand where the white bead bracelet jingled loosely. "That's pretty." Rosa smiled back at Lorna, and that just about did it for Tomacita. She laughed and bounced the baby so that she kept up the pink-gummed grin. "I know," Tomacita said. "I found it when I was out running this morning. It's a good sign." Tomacita stripped off her sweaty running clothes and slipped them into a plastic garbage bag to take up to the laundromat tomorrow. She stepped into the shower. She tried to avoid the mirror as she did, but she always seemed to glimpse the handles of fat spilling over her hips or her belly pouching forward around her waist. She lathered and scrubbed until she no longer smelled like sweat. When she stepped out, the first glimpse in the mirror showed her cellulite dotting an upper thigh like smallpox scars that she'd seen in history books. And then she saw them, branching blue and crooked near her knee like dark roots, varicose veins. She'd rarely seen them before, but they seemed dark and deep now, like they'd always been there. She turned her head and toweled off, wrapped herself in her bathrobe, and heard through the small bathroom window the yellow leaves from the poplar trees around her trailer skitter out onto the paved road. She massaged her face in the mirror, watching the wrinkles around her mouth, chin, and eyes flex and stretch. She preferred to call them the wrinkles, not her wrinkles, as though she didn't own them yet. They were just there, especially when her skin softened in the hot water. At least she had brown skin. White women like that crazy nurse Jane Lewis seemed to show theirs earlier and more dramatically. Tomacita used to wear makeup to lighten her face, back when she'd gone to bars in Farmington and Pueblo, cruising for a good time with the right man. But those days were gone. The makeup had just been expensive. The smoke from the bars had made her hair stink every morning. The men didn't usually stick around to smell it either. And nothing wrinkles your face like alcohol and late nights. She'd learned that. But Tomacita joked with herself that even when the wrinkles became her wrinkles, she'd just end up looking like a wise Indian matriarch, proud of her people and her heritage. National Geographic, here I come. She could hear her grandfather laugh. "The white man brought the mirror with him," he'd always say. "And that was when we stopped caring about how we looked to other people and started caring too much about how we looked to ourselves." Her left eye twitched. It did that sometimes, ever since her first husband had smacked her in the head with their rotary phone in their first apartment in Grants, New Mexico more than 20 years ago. But mistakes stick around, don't they? Oh yeah, big time. Tomacita knew that. "Mistakes stick around," Grandfather would say. "Just learn how to live with them and you'll be all right." After Lorna had loaded the boys into her 1991 Crown Victoria and drove with them up to Clagato to see her mother, Tomacita set Rosa down for her nap and sat down to read the exercise book that Alta had given her. Her damn nosy sister. It had that really ripped Mexican guy from Saved by the Bell on the cover. "Even if you don't use it," Alta had said, "it's got some great pictures for when you're alone." Tomacita had flipped her off for that one. "I bet you know what to use that finger for," Alta had cracked. Tomacita had just smiled and shook her head. As she flipped the pages, she tongued along her left bottom molars, pushing hard against the small bump on her gum. She'd had a filling on that tooth last year, and Alta would probably tell her she was developing an abscess. All that Tomacita felt was a hell of a toothache that would come and go. She could go to the dentist at the Indian Health Service Hospital in Fort Defiance or at Red House Hospital, but it would just be some Anglo man in a white coat telling her she should have brushed her teeth instead of saving all those pennies to buy RC Cola down at the trading post when she'd been a girl. Tomacita would fall back into that classic excuse often favored by smokers. "But I didn't think it was bad. Nobody ever told me." Rosa was awake before Tomacita finished the first chapter. She walked to the bedroom, picked up the baby, and felt the squish of her full diaper. It was a wet one. She set Rosa on her back and flowed into the changing routine, but she had enough time to notice the small white bead sitting in the center of the wet diaper when she opened it. At first she thought it was a bead that had fallen off the bracelet, but the bracelet still circled Rosa's wrist. The bead wasn't fully white like the others either. It had a frosty gray color on its sides. Tomacita wasn't squeamish about getting a little pee-pee on her fingers. She'd butchered lambs before she'd learned to ride a bicycle, so she picked up the bead. Its cool sting spread over her fingers, and she recognized its smooth, watery surface. It was a hailstone. What the hell was a hailstone doing in her granddaughter's diaper? Did she poop it out or something? The thing was melting in her hand rather fast, like an ice cube dropped on a skillet. That cool sting spread over her hand and almost into her hand. Then it went into her arm, up into her shoulder, and flowed up her neck and down her back. She quivered at the intensity of the sensation. She'd felt chills up her back sometimes, when her cousins had scared her with skinwalker stories out at grandfather's hogan near Hunter's Point, or when she'd been in bed with a man for the first time. But this was different. Her toes curled. Her mouth popped open, and she felt her tongue gliding back and forth along her teeth. Her nipples hardened. She hadn't felt this kind of raw elation since the last time she'd been in labor, when the doctors had given her an epidural, and she'd felt the anesthesia flood through her like holy water until her cup ranneth over and all the pain spilled out. Below her, Rosa kicked and smiled. Tomacita reached for the new diaper, but then realized that she couldn't. Her hand that held the hailstone had clamped into a fist so tight her knuckles had gone white. She forced her hand open and held it away from the baby, expected the water to spill out onto the carpet. It didn't. Instead, a cool mist evaporated from the ends of her fingers, like how dry ice would smoke when you poured water over it. She rubbed her fingers, and they felt cool and dry, like she just coated them with baby powder. Rosa kicked and cooed below. Tomacita grabbed the new diaper. "That was quite a change," she said to Rosa, tapping her lips with her finger like she did whenever she wanted to get the baby girl smiling. And it worked. It always did. And it was quite a change. Quite a change indeed. Something was different. Something uneasy, but pleasant at the same time. She ran her tongue over her teeth and considered the strange euphoria that had so blissfully passed over her. Aha! She had it. The toothache. It was gone. When Lorna got back that night, Tomacita helped her make tortillas and beans for dinner. After she set the dishes in the rack to dry, she walked into the bathroom and went through her usual routine. Brushed teeth, flossed, washed face, stepped on the scale, checked for lost weight. Everything got done just fine, except for that last bit. Weight had been practically dogpiling her hips and belly over the summer. She hated the heat, and so for Tomacita Jones, summer was ice cream season. She read the numbers. She swore quietly to herself. Now she'd have to buy a new scale and gallop. It read that she'd lost 10 pounds. Tomacita knew math. She was paid to know her math. And that number didn't add up. The next day, she went through her normal morning. Up by 5:30, helped the boys get ready for school, cook potatoes and bacon for Lorna while she fed Rosa from the breast, feed the boys, and then scrape together the leftover potatoes and bacon into tortillas that she'd warmed on the other cast-iron skillet. These she folded into burritos and wrapped into aluminum foil to take to work in her small igloo cooler to sell to the ladies who worked in the front office. But she always set 3 aside for those students she'd find waiting outside her classroom early. Those kids got their burritos for free. She spent the day mostly teaching the 8th graders how to solve for X when they had a negative slope on a line. Some days she would have preferred wrestling and shearing sheep to getting middle school students to give a crap about algebra, one of the better things that the Biliganas had brought with them. She would be drained like that cup that too often ranneth over until it was just empty. But today, she'd had so much energy that she felt she couldn't sit down. She took the exercise book with her to the laundromat after work and bounced her foot over her knee nearly the whole time. I probably look like a dime store junkie grandma, she thought, smiling. She folded her clothes briskly and left as soon as she could. The cool autumn air felt good against her hair and almost tickled the back of her neck as she walked the mesh laundry bag out to the truck. The nighthawks, busy, cut across the orange sky on their knife-blade wings. It was getting darker earlier now. When she got home, Lorna was frying onions and trying to get Manuel to focus on his math homework. When Tomacita asked about Rosa, Lorna said the baby was napping, but Tomacita could wake her up. She would need to eat soon. "Okay, sure," Tomacita said. "She probably needs to be changed, too." When she slid her hand over the black fluff of Rosa's hair, the baby winced and puckered her small lips disapprovingly, as though the subcommittee in her little mind had decided that now was certainly not the time to wake. She started to cry, but Tomacita knew the look and stroked her fluff and sang quietly and touched her cheeks, and Rosa blinked her eyes slowly open. "Hey," Tomacita said. "Hey, you." Rosa grinned her toothless grandma grin and kicked excitedly. Tomacita checked the diaper and, yep, it was wet. When she took off the diaper, she wondered if she would see it again, and it was there. In the center of the yellow diaper pad was a hailstone, like something you'd see lying on the sand after a freak summer storm up in the mountains when the clouds would swirl and darken as black as your hair. Tomacita picked up the hailstone, and it melted in her fingers just like before. The euphoria hit her even harder this time, snaked up her arm, thrummed up her mouth, and she nearly moaned. She opened her eyes, and it was like Rosa, the mattress, the Transformers blanket on the bed, the diaper bag next to the bed, and the framed painting of Jesus Christ and the photo of the Diné chieftain Manuelito on the wall above the bed were all coated with a white mist. It all looked soft. She felt soft. She blinked. Rosa was blinking and squirming and crying. She had some kind of clear liquid on her face, and it had run into her eye. "Oh, baby," Tomacita said, using the sleeve of her blouse to wipe the stuff away. She smelled it. It was spit. She understood the only logical way it could have gotten on Rosa's face. She, Tomacita Jones, had been leaning over the baby with her mouth gaped open like a stone junkie until drool gathered on her chin and dropped into the little girl's eye. She cleaned Rosa's face with a wet nap from the diaper bag, and then wiped it again just to be sure. The whole time, her own hand felt baby powder dry and cool. After she finished the dishes that night and the boys took their showers, she volunteered to give Rosa a bath in the enamelware basin in the bathroom. "You'll use up the rest of the hot water," Lorna said. "Don't you need a shower?" "I can just take it in the morning." "Thanks then," Lorna said, and turned back to the television. Dancing with the Stars was on. Lorna never missed it. That's when she noticed the dark marks on Rosa's legs. At first they reminded her of stretch marks, like the kind her boys had gotten when they shot up through puberty, but they were smaller, and a purple blue that reminded Tomacita of veins. She ran soapy water over them and scrubbed at them a little. It was just a discoloration, nothing to worry about. If she found them the next day, she would tell Lorna, and they could take Rosa down to see her sister Alta at the Red House Hospital. She didn't bother with the scale that night. It was broken. Besides, she didn't need it. She'd felt great all day. The next morning she slipped into the shower and tried to avoid looking in the mirror at the rolls of fat that would be tumbling off her hips like a pile of folded towels. But she somehow always caught them out of the corner of her eye. But when her eye executed that all-too-familiar little move, Tomacita stopped her breath. She stopped mid-step into the shower, slipped on the wet fiberglass of the tub, and nearly fell against the shower wall. After recovering her balance, she checked the mirror again. Those rolls of fat weren't there. The fat wasn't totally gone, but it looked like someone had scraped off most of it with a putty knife and flushed it down the toilet. She faced the mirror and noticed her breasts standing firmer than they usually did, before her boys had gotten at them when they were nursing and before menopause had bulldogged whatever perkiness she'd had left. But the smooth line from her hips to her legs was unmistakable, like the hips of those models she saw airbrushed on the magazine covers you saw waiting in line at the Albertsons and Gallup. She stepped into the shower and decided to soap up and wash, thinking that most of what she'd seen would be gone after the hot water woke her up. After she'd finished, she bent to turn off the water and clean the shower drain. It seemed like for each shower, she was cleaning at least 20 of her graying hairs these days. She pulled back her hand as though a spider had crawled up from the drain. It was totally clean. She couldn't see a single hair. That was about as likely as her growing the thighs of a more mature pin-up model overnight. But when she walked out and toweled off, those slimmer thighs and smoother hips were as real as the dude glass in the mirror above the sink. She slapped her leg. It barely quivered. She angled it to the side and nearly caught her breath. Tomacita had given up wearing shorts 2 years before her 50th birthday. That's when she first noticed them, groping from under her jiggly thigh flesh and running down to the backs of her knees like dying purple roots. The varicose veins. The day she'd first seen them in the steamy mirror of the shower 2 days before Christmas break, she'd wanted to cry. And she had. But she wasn't crying today. She rotated her leg and examined the angle of her knee, the back of the thigh, then the back of the knee. Absolutely. They were gone. She walked forward and stepped on the broken scale. She'd lost 12 pounds now. Hell yeah. She smiled, and maybe it was the misty steam on the mirror. Her face seemed smoother somehow. Like the wrinkles had somehow tightened back into her cheekbones. She felt them, but they felt so much smoother. So dry and smooth. Maybe the scale wasn't broken after all. Rosa cried from the bedroom, and she heard Lorna waking with her. Tomacita stepped off the scale and pulled on her bathrobe. She stepped out in the hallway, waiting to hear Rosa's cries subside as the baby took her mother's nipple for her morning feed. But the crying kept up. Tomacita walked quickly into the room, nearly kicking the diaper bag next to the stacked mattresses where Lorna and Tomacita had been sleeping. The dim light from the hallway revealed Lorna cradling the crying baby against her chest. "Is she all right?" Tomacita asked. "I don't know," Lorna said. "She doesn't want to eat." Tomacita turned on the light in the room. Lorna breathed in so hard she seemed to shudder. "Oh," she gasped. "What's that on her leg?" "What?" Tomacita stepped around her and bent over Rosa. The purple streaks on the edges of the baby's thighs and knees were darker now. Tomacita recognized them immediately. They were varicose veins. Tomacita called in sick and took Lorna to the hospital to see Alta. After they signed in, they sat in the waiting room. Rosa slept against Lorna's shoulder, sloppily and heavily, like a drunk man. Her mouth hung open and she drooled. She hardly ever did that. Lorna noticed it, and so did Tomacita. When she woke a few minutes later, her face relaxed suddenly, and then she started crying. That was it. Sure sign of a number 2 in the diaper. "I'll take her," Tomacita said. "You just rest easy." "Okay, Shama," Lorna said. "Yeah." Tomacita took Rosa into the women's restroom, set Rosa on the koala care changing table, took a fresh diaper from the bag, and set to the task. When she peeled the diaper away, she found 2 small turds so dry and twisted they looked like they'd been molded out of green plastic. Right between them sat the hailstone. And lo, it shined like it had just fallen from the sky. Tomacita had been fascinated by the thing at first. She still didn't understand why it was there, but she still acknowledged it with a frustrated understanding, like how she'd responded when her grandfather had once told her how it had hailed frogs one time at his sheep camp when he'd been a boy. The little jar fell out of the sky and bounced off the sand. Some of them were still alive. Grandfather had said hailstones held a special power. They often came in the time of spring, that time when the earth was softening up and getting ready for the plants to grow. And what did it mean that hailstones would be falling out of her granddaughter? They said that children were soft when they were young, that they were like the plants when the dawn comes and the land is covered with cool dew. She'd been soft once, and the Canal Da was supposed to toughen her, to harden her into a woman. But she'd never had the ceremony. She didn't know what that had to do with her granddaughter pushing what looked like hailstones out her butt, but the thought had risen in her just the same. Grandfather had said those kind of thoughts were important. It didn't keep her from picking up the hailstone. She knew the shock would be there, and it was. That pulsing, strong hit that made her quiver and her mouth drop open and brought her breasts up to where she'd used to feel them when she was in her 30s, before she'd ever nursed or even dreamed of grandchildren. She shook the water away from her open hand after the sensations had subsided into squirming, sensual tremors up and down her neck and arms. She changed the diaper, then checked herself in the mirror. Yes, the wrinkles were barely noticeable now. She touched her face. Her skin was so dry and cool. Tomacita kept her hand on Lorna's shoulder as they walked out of the hospital. Lorna barely made it to the car. She slumped into the seat and wept over Rosa, who napped serenely beneath her mother's quiet sobs. Lorna had read Alta's body language as clearly as Tomacita had. Something was wrong with the baby. Alta had said that the only thing she could pick up was an irregular heartbeat. She'd also noticed the varicose veins. She said it could be nothing. Sometimes that happened to babies. Usually they just disappeared. "Hush, daughter," Tomacita whispered, touching Lorna's shoulder. "Let her sleep. Everything's going to be good." Lorna said something, but Tomacita couldn't hear it. Or maybe she didn't want to. She closed Lorna's door, walked around the car and slid into the driver's seat, something that was so much easier to do these days. A rumble spread in the gray sky above. Small patterns of rain dotted the windshield. It was rare to see any rain in the autumn. Soon the rain was dancing off the hood. Lorna played nervously with the white bead bracelet on Rosa's wrist. "We'll wait to drive until it passes," Tomacita said. Lorna wiped her nose and readjusted Rosa against her body. "I have to pee," she said. Tomacita nodded. "Me too. We'll be home soon." Tomacita watched the water run down the windshield glass. Things changed and shifted so easily these past few days. Things seemed much more fluid. A tapping need rose in Tomacita's throat. The beauty of the rain helped distract her from the thought that she hoped Rosa would have to pee soon, too. That she would need to be changed. That week, Tomacita kept Lorna close. She baked bread and bought mutton from Bash's in Window Rock, something she hadn't done for at least a year. She made sure the young woman didn't feel the need to travel back to Clogatow to see her mother. She wanted her to feel safe in the trailer, to know that Rosa would be taken care of. Tomacita managed the details. She came home during her lunch hour, making sure that Lorna found enough to eat or taking time to cook her some eggs and ham or to fry up some peppers to add to her bowl of ramen noodles. She was still breastfeeding, after all, and the food would help Rosa get better. During all this, Tomacita sometimes felt she was living a second life, but she had the energy for it. She'd stopped running in the morning. She no longer needed to. She practically bounded down the hill to work these days. On Tuesdays, she caught herself taking the stairs 2 at a time when she had to run up to the second floor to help one of the counselors pull Roland Deschiini out of science class because his foster parents had been arrested for a DUI when they were coming back from Gallup. During all this runaround, Tomacita remembered the boys. She helped them with their fractions. When Joseph, the oldest, tore open the crotch of his jeans while making a diving tackle during a football game at recess, Tomacita rubbed the sand out of his hair, took out her sewing box, and patched the jeans so neatly that the boy could barely see the new stitches. "Thanks, Grandma," he said. Such are the words that angels sing in heaven. She'd heard a preacher say those words once. She was understanding them more these days. Tomacita also did the dirty work. She changed Rosa's diaper whenever she could, even during her lunch hour. She'd lost another 10 pounds by the end of the week. On Wednesday, she'd first noticed the wrinkles on Rosa's hands. Her veins popped from her skin like they belonged to an old man. Lorna noticed the baby's feet a few days later when she lifted Rosa to burp her over her back. They were wrinkled and wired with dull purple veins like gargoyle toes. They took her back to the hospital. When Tomacita noticed the broken capillaries on the side of Rosa's nose, they took her back again. Alta sent away for tests. In the meantime, Tomacita couldn't explain to Lorna why spots in the baby's black fluff had started to go gray. That Saturday, Tomacita ran into Gallup for groceries. Lorna stayed and watched the boys. She also wanted to call Melvin and see how his new welding job was working out in Houston. He'd been sending money regularly, and it was good money. Lorna hadn't told him about Rosa yet. Tomacita even thought she might stop at the theater in the mall to see a movie. Something with some action, maybe. Maybe that new Expendables movie with all those hot old men. They had learned to stop their aging. They were still strong. She stretched her slim, firm legs as she got out of the truck. She'd worn a nice turquoise skirt today, paired with an adobe blouse and a jean jacket, an outfit she still had from before her second pregnancy, when she'd still bought outfits. It was short and flirty, and she could feel the cold wind of the late fall traveling up through her lacy panties. Her tight thighs and smooth calves carried her across the Rio West Mall parking lot. She saw the movie, Stallone Killed the Villain. Then she stopped at GNC to get some whey protein and an iron supplement that Alta thought might help Lorna's lactation, just in case her breastfeeding had something to do with Rosa's problems. On her way out to the truck, a tall, thin man in a red shirt stepped out from the Class Act, a bar attached to the mall, and whistled at her. She turned and felt her thin thighs stretch against her turquoise skirt, and that did it. The guy just wouldn't give up. Tomacita made sure he held the door for her when she walked into the bar. She would only stay for one drink. Just one. They got to talking. He was a former rodeo bronc rider, of course he was, and a journeyman electrician who'd come back to the res to visit relatives near Yatahe. She was pretty sure what he was saying was mostly lies, so she didn't bother to listen too carefully. Into their second drink, he put his hand on her thigh. It felt better than when she picked up the hailstone for the first time. She had to work really hard not to want to kiss him. He said he was watching his cousin's place for him while he was working up in Durango. Nobody else was out there. If she wanted to ride out with him, he'd drive. He just bought a new truck, a Chevy. Tomacita had always loved Chevys, and her husband had been a Ford man, the shitty bastard. She took his hand and caressed it away from her thigh. She jutted her chin forward and said she needed to make a little stop in the bathroom. As she walked to the back of the room, each piece of ice clinking in the glasses on the bar looked like a hailstone. She did her business and stopped to check herself in the mirror on the way out. She almost couldn't breathe. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes weren't just faded. It was like they'd never existed. The shape of her nose sat beautifully against her cheekbones, now devoid of puffy fat. Her eyes seemed brighter, her lips firmer. It was like looking at her younger self, a photograph resurrected and put into flesh. In the mirror was a woman who'd never had children, or went to college, or helped to organize her grandfather's funeral, or had said the prayers as her older brothers had shoveled the earth over his body. It was the face of a woman whose beauty radiated from her simplicity and her ignorance. It was like looking at someone she didn't know anymore, someone Mrs. Tomacita Jones had tried for many years to never be again. Maybe in the end it was the math that saved her, that damn Billigano white magic. If teaching 8th graders how to solve for X over the past 2 decades had taught her anything, it was this. Some outcomes are inevitable. Tomacita had spent 20 autumns, winters, and springs getting up early and walking into a cinder-block classroom to a chalkboard and teaching children to understand this truth. X is a mystery, but it is a mystery that will be solved. There is an end point. And here she was at the end point. She could see the path extending before her. She was going to go through it all again. The meeting of the lusty man, she realized she hadn't actually even learned his name. The fiery, meaningless fucks on strange mattresses. The promises, the broken promises, the warm whiskey burn of the healing, the mending, the promises again heaped like firewood to stave off the cold. But they were still promises meant to be burned. It was in their nature. She looked at her younger self and realized all the pain this stupid woman had put her through while trying to survive her own immaturity and solve her own imaginary mysteries. Tomacita had already spent enough energy and earned enough pain for solving X. She wasn't going to redo the problem. Not again. She had already earned the answers. She felt a sudden urge in her hand and throat to change Rosa's diaper. That's when she felt sick and turned to put her face over the toilet. Nothing came, and that really surprised her. She peeked out of the restroom alcove, ducked around a chubby woman in a low lacy top and stretch pants, and spied the guy in the red shirt. She waited until his back was turned before she walked out of the class act. When she got to the parking lot, she ran. On her new, slimmer, tougher legs, she didn't get tired. When she got to the stop sign next to Fur's cafeteria and took the left-hand turn onto Route 491, she already had an idea of what she needed to do to solve this problem. When she got back to Wide Reeds, she found Alta's message on her answering machine. The baby had been losing weight. Lorna had taken her to the hospital again. Alta was asking for Tomacita to get her butt down there as soon as she got the message. Tomacita grabbed what she needed out of the mason jar next to her sewing machine, then drove to Red House Hospital. When she arrived, Lorna was asleep next to Rosa. Her face was puffy from crying, and Tomacita noticed the small streaks of salt on her cheeks from the tears. She imagined those tears gullying out some new wrinkles on the face of the young woman. Lorna's face would age soon, and good for her. Rosa squirmed in her bassinet, and Tomacita felt sick. She could see the veins popping from the baby's hands and feet. She noticed also fluffy black hairs growing from the baby's ears. The red burst capillaries had also spread along her nose. Streaks of gray ran through her downy hair. She looks like a little old drunk woman, Tomacita thought. She looks like the person I might have been. I'm becoming the person she might have been. But she felt some relief when she saw the white bead bracelet on the baby's wrist. Good. She remembered the day she had found it. She remembered her lie about running in the morning. She hadn't really run. Not really. She barely jogged a piece of a lap and then quit. Then she saw the trotting coyote. That was all bad medicine, and she had brought it home. This was one of the variables, an X in the solution. She wasn't sure how or what X really was, but she knew what she had to do. She knew what grandfather would have told her to do. She took the orange-handled scissors from her pocket and cut the cotton string of the bracelet off Rosa's wrist. Before the white beads could fall off the string, she reknotted it and tucked it into her pocket. She'd need it later. Then she picked up the old drunk woman that Rosa had become and rocked the baby and sang softly into her ear. It was an old song, something from grandfather. She'd need that later, too. Alta came in a few minutes later. Lorna woke up, and they talked about taking Rosa to a specialist in Albuquerque that weekend. Tomacita would need more time, though, and she pushed for waiting another week. She offered up arguments that Alta anticipated and shut down quickly. In the end, she had to play the victim and had to lie. She'd noticed something wrong with the truck on the way back from Gallup. She would probably need to get it fixed. She didn't have the money right now. Could they wait until next payday? Alta seemed to buy that. Lorna held Rosa's little gargoyle hand and looked like she really wanted to wake up from this bad dream that her life had become. But Tomacita was already working things out before they left the hospital. She would need 4 days at least. She would need to pick up some things from her brother. She found most of what she needed in the abandoned hogan next to her brother's house. He hadn't opened it in more than 8 years, not since their mother had died. She put on a painter's mask to protect her from any deer mice droppings floating around in the air. Alta had told her stories of the hantavirus and how it could kill fit and healthy people who could run a mile a lot faster than her in just a few days. She dug through the cardboard boxes and found what she needed in just less than 2 hours. The dry autumn leaves rattled in the Chinese elms near her brother's house. It had been her parents' house, where they'd grown up. She closed the padlock on the front door of the hogan, set the keys on the table near the door, and got into her truck. Her brother was on his 3rd beer of the day, and she didn't want to talk to him. Over the next 4 days, Tomacita did everything she could remember about the kinalda. She knew that the ceremony was for pulling and stretching and shaping the girl into the woman, to make the soft thing into something hard and enduring. She had never had it, and now these white beads from the bracelet had opened something between her, the soft woman, and Rosa, the soft child. She needed to harden herself. She needed to shut whatever the beads had opened. It started with brushing her hair. The first morning, she washed her hair in yucca suds that she made in a small basket she'd gotten from her grandmother. Then she took the grass brush she'd taken from the hogan. She brushed her hair back into a tight bun. After, she tied on her dress, her moccasins, and the other item from the hogan, her sislechi, the red sash belt that her grandmother had woven for her. Women used to wear it during their pregnancy to help keep their backs strong. When they were giving birth, they used to get on their knees, throw the belt up around a rafter in the hogan, and pull on it to help with the birth pains. Then they would wear it to help put their belly and their spine back into shape. This was the first time Tomacita had ever worn it. She didn't know why the hairs on the back of her neck stood up when she tied it on, but she had a good idea. After she tied her moccasins and put in the large turquoise earrings from her maternal grandmother, she walked to the bedroom to change Rosa. When she opened the diaper, she found a hailstone, gray but shimmering like crystal. She made sure to wear the latex gloves she'd taken from Red House Hospital. She felt its cool energy through the glove as she carried it to the bathroom and threw it in the toilet. She flushed just to be sure. After, she laid out the Pendleton blanket her grandmother had given her after her high school graduation. Then she laid out the deer hide she kept rolled in a Tupperware storage bin under her bed. It was the first time she'd touched the hide in 18 years. She sat and stretched the way she'd seen her auntie stretch at her kinalda. She faced the east and tried to imagine her Auntie Rhoda there with her. Her ideal woman who had raised her kids, kept them fed, kept them in school. Her oldest son was a doctor in Tucson now, and she did it all without a husband. Then she got up and walked outside. Hardly anyone was awake. A few dogs barked further down the wash. Venus was up in the gray sky, and some of the clouds had turned pink. Tomacita Jones faced to the east, and she ran. She ran until she felt too tired to run back, and then she turned around and ran back. She knew that kinalda was supposed to grind corn all day, and so she ground at least 2 pounds worth. Then she got up to help Lorna as she woke up with Rosa. Lorna didn't ask about Tomacita's clothes or the ground corn. She probably didn't even know what they were for. Tomacita knew that Lorna had been raised a Methodist, and her parents hadn't talked to the holy people since they'd been baptized. That day, Tomacita made sure not to laugh, not to eat sugar. She only drank tea and water, which became really hard when the boys came home from school with some Doritos they bought in that damn vending machine outside the counseling office. She'd never come closer to stealing from her own grandchildren. Traditionally, the kinalda can't be around kids, or she would have them too early. Tomacita didn't have to worry about that. That had already happened. She remembered to wear the latex gloves when she changed Rosa that day. The next morning, she went through the same routine. She wore the gloves. The school called and asked when she'd be back that week, but they didn't push since Tomacita had never taken a sick day in her 23 years at Wide Reeds Middle School. On the third day, she nearly wept when she went to change Rosa in the afternoon. She found no hailstone. That night, she didn't find one either. She still wore the gloves, just in case. The next morning, the varicose veins had turned yellow like a faded bruise. She hoped they'd keep fading. The little girl's nose was now brown and smooth again. On the fourth day, she knew that the relatives of the kinalda would usually make a cake from the corn she had ground. They'd bake it for about a day in a pit dug 3 feet deep and about a foot wide. Tomacita reasoned she would need people to help her, but she couldn't tell anyone about this. "Hey, Shaddai, I'm having my womanhood ceremony this week, even though I'm 49 years old, divorced, and dry. I need your help." "Why? Oh, it's because my littlest granddaughter has been shitting hailstones. I touched one of them, and I think I'm sucking away her youth. I've never felt better." So Tomacita just poured the corn batter into a massive roasting pan and baked the cake in the oven on low heat. She stayed up all night with it. "The important thing is I know why I'm doing this," she thought. "I still have my prayers for changing woman, and the 12 songs for the 12 feathers worn by talking God. I don't need them to make me a woman. I just need them to help Rosa. I am the woman who put Rosa in danger. Nobody can change the woman I have become but me. Others have tried, and I have hated them for it. I have to fix this." She hoped the holy people would hear her. She hoped it would be enough. In the bathroom mirror, she saw how her wrinkles had returned, because that's what they were now. Her wrinkles. Her hip chub had popped back too, but less than before. She tongued her sore tooth, and it dulled the subtle pulsing pain. At 5 o'clock, she took the corn cake out of the oven to cool. She would cut up the massive thing and give it to friends at work, maybe a slice to Rosa. Then she'd find a place she never wanted to go to again, and she'd bury those white beads from the bracelet there, so no one would ever find them. No one saw her when she walked out to the edge of the mesa. She was wearing the scuffed running shoes. She wanted them with her. She would be using them a lot after today. There was a lot of praying to do, and not the kind you did with hands raised or sang out in a church. Only the sun, Jehona'e, would see her. Only the earth, Nahas-san, would hear her feet. Tomacita Jones felt the warmth of the rising sun on her face. Her breath smoked in the cold autumn morning. Frost had gathered on the grana grass, and the sagebrush seemed to glow silver. The sort of morning her grandfather would have enjoyed. She ran.
Only a writer of Jim's caliber could do what's done here. Even knowing it was him, the early comments about weight got a few of my hackles instinctively up. Here's the thing. I'm a person of size. I've yo-yoed between above and just below 300 pounds my whole life. Chances are, I always will. I've weight watched. I am currently perhaps 40 days off logging my calories continuously for 1,000 days. If I get that far, I'm going to buy myself the entirety of Community to have on in the background while I do yoga and Debbie and probably 7-Minute Superhero as well. Weight is a negotiation. Shape and size and health are a negotiation. I've long ago given up hope of dropping 100 pounds because that was unrealistic, and just in case any of you are about to ask if I've considered keto, yes, I have. And if you ask me to give up bread, you're basically asking me to give up joy. Besides, I've done enough diets, one of which, hilariously, as a child, involved a full day of vegetable soup. Oh yeah. A full day of all bran. Yep. And a full day of nothing but fruit. Yeah, that was fun. I've done a few of those. They never work. They never stick. I am instinctively wary of diets, and crash dieting in particular doesn't work. And as this story shows, magical artifacts do. Just not in a good way. What works is change, fundamentally. And change, strangely, comes from acceptance. I'm a person of size. I always will be. I won and own the space I take up, and my health is an ongoing conversation, a negotiation, like I said. A few years ago, that conversation included martial arts. More recently, running. Last year, swimming. All of those will be back on the table soon. For now, it's pounding the pavements and yoga and listening not to the voice in my head telling me how much space I take up, but the one saying 11,000 steps today. Good job. Or the one saying 15,000 steps today. Good job. Or the one a couple of weeks ago saying 23,000 steps and the last thing you ate was 8 hours ago. This is why we don't do conventions alone. What the hell? Have some food. That one I maybe should have listened to a little earlier. Anyway, this whole thing really comes down to, as many things do in this industry, a quote from MC Frontalot, and that quote is this: "Hey DNA, let's negotiate." That's what makes what Jim says here, what Jim explores here, all the more insidious. Putting a trained negotiator on your side of the table, offloading the years, but the years still have to go somewhere. And that's where the horror comes in, where Mephistopheles smiles and nods approvingly and, for old time's sake, flicks through that first edition of Dr. Faustus, the one up on the shelf at the far left. The one with the strange binding. Because this is a bargain that no one wants to make and everyone wants to make. Your health and beauty for someone else's. A baby aged before their time versus another chance at the life you richly deserve. No one wins, whatever happens. There are just gradations of acceptance, of penance, of tribute, of negotiation. There's no shame in age. There's no shame in shape. There is no shame in size. None at all. You're built how you're built. Change that how you're able. Change that how you want to, not how other people tell you you should, because all of us, when called upon, are extraordinary, because all of us, when we have to, run. Thank you both, as ever.
Hi there. If you like PseudoPod, we think you'll love a new podcast featuring horror from Black authors called Nightlight that will premiere at the end of June 2018. We've raised enough money to pay 10 Black writers for 10 episodes so far, but we need your help to fund the entire season. Go to nightlightpod.com for details on how to contribute and how to subscribe. That's nightlightpod.com. Let's work together to bring Black horror out of the shadows.
We rely on you to, well, pretty much do everything. Pay our authors, pay our staff, cover our server costs. And there are 3 ways you can do this, all of which begin with P. And a big shout out to the several listeners who've reached out to me after the last NCAP to inform me of some of the words I could have used instead of the word which I failed to use and just shoved a P on the end of last time. First off, PayPal. If you go to pseudopod.org and click on Feed the Pod, there you'll be given 2 options. The first is to donate, the second is to subscribe. Subscriptions start at as little as $5 a month. You would not believe how much that helps. You also, unless you were listening at the start of the show, in which case, hi, hope you're having fun, will know that that $5 gets you access to the premium content table. There's an amazing amount of stuff on there, and new stuff's added all the time. I think the most recent thing that went on was the conversation Karen Bovenmeier and I had over on the Patreon page about the secret history of Wonder Woman and Dr. Marston and the Wonder Women, the movie based on that, all of which is really good stuff. Karen and I will be talking about Solo later this week with any luck, so that should go up in about 5 to 10 days too. Alternatively, you can do the same thing over at Patreon. Again, $5 gets you a ticket to the show. Patreon also has I believe, free to the public event feed, so you can see all kinds of stuff that's going on with us, take a look at each episode that goes live, all that kind of thing. It's great. There's some really good stuff over there. I write the vast majority of it. You will be able to tell. And, yeah, go check it out. And again, if you can, either through Patreon or PayPal, donate. And if you can donate at a certain level, you'll get stuff. And then, after PayPal and Patreon, there is promotion. Yes. We know not everybody has the financial wherewithal to back projects like this. We often are in that position ourselves. That's fine. Please don't overreach. Please don't feel guilty. But there are things you can do that don't involve giving us money. If there is an episode that you liked, talk about it. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, what the hell? You know, anything like that. And link to the episode, because that will bring eyes to it. And then maybe someone else will like it, and someone else, and someone else. And suddenly we've got new listeners coming to the show. If you can, please leave us reviews, either on iTunes or Google Play or wherever you listen to the show. You would have no idea how much that helps. And finally, if you have a podcast or a blog, or anything where you like to have guests on to talk about stuff, if you want to have a chat with us about what we do, please get in touch. We love talking about this. This is an amazing job, and the professional enthusiasm I kind of embody is very, very much present at every other level of the company. So, if you want to, please reach out. So there it is. PayPal, Patreon, promotion. Please help out, if you can, on at least one. We'll be back next week when, as ever, we will be a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Our story will be The Boy with the Glass Eyes by J.L. Flannery and read by the magnificent Paul S. Jenkins. And we leave you now with this quote from Mr. Henry Rollins, a man who has got me through the good times, the bad times, and all the times in between. My optimism is loud and wears heavy boots. Yours should too. See you next week, folks.